We've all heard the stories. China is this big, powerful country that people say is going to take over the world. But is that really true? Or have the media just been telling us stories that aren't quite right? Today, we're going to look at 5 big pieces of Western propaganda about China. Things that are so off, they could be from a bad spy movie. We're going to clear things up and show you the real picture. Let's get started. Number 1. People in China have no freedom. Oh, the classic China is a totalitarian nightmare narrative. According to many Western media outlets, Chinese people are forced to bow down to the Communist Party every morning before even thinking about leaving the house, right? Wrong. Let's talk about freedom. Yes, China has a different political system. It's not a Western democracy, and it doesn't pretend to be. But that doesn't mean people there have no freedom. In fact, China is one of the world's most diverse countries. Ever been to Beijing, Shanghai, or Chengdu? The sheer variety of lifestyles, food, and entertainment options will make you forget you're even in a repressive regime. Here's the thing. Freedom isn't just about whether you can speak your mind openly at a rally or post whatever you want on social media. It's also about having opportunities to build a better life, something that many Western countries, for all their freedoms, sometimes struggle to deliver. You can't tell me that a person from a rural Chinese village in 1990 making less than $200 a year has it worse than a person in the same position in the US today. Because in China, things have changed. The numbers speak for themselves. Over 850 million people lifted out of poverty since the 1980s. That's more than the entire population of Europe. It's economic freedom that China's citizens are grateful for. People in China are not stuck in a cage, unless you're talking about how fast they're racing through life. In fact, China's middle class is growing so quickly that it's now the largest in the world. Forget about political freedoms for a moment. How about the freedom to live a better life? China has done more to help its people thrive in the last few decades than any Western democracy could dream of. So no, they're not living in fear of Big Brother. They're just getting things done in their own way. Number 2, China has no human rights. Here's where things get really interesting. Western media loves to throw China under the human rights bus, especially when it comes to things like the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang or the crackdown on protests in Hong Kong. And sure, there are real issues, but guess what? The US is far from perfect when it comes to human rights. Just ask Black Lives Matter or any of the people struggling with systemic inequality. But somehow, China's human rights abuses are always the big, shining star of every news cycle. Now, I'm not saying China is some utopian paradise for human rights. The crackdown on protests, especially in Hong Kong, raises valid concerns. But China has its own approach to human rights, economic rights to be specific. Over 850 million people lifted out of poverty, remember? That's a huge human rights victory. If you ask a Chinese person what matters most to them, they're probably not thinking about freedom of speech because that comes much later on their wish list. They're thinking about stability, jobs, healthcare, and education. The basics. It's not about having the freedom to say whatever you want. It's about having the freedom to live. And let's not forget about China's efforts in tackling global human rights issues like public health. The country has lifted millions out of malnutrition and disease, all thanks to initiatives like universal health care and the elimination of extreme poverty. That's more tangible than an opinion piece from the New York Times, don't you think? So, while we can argue about China's human rights in specific areas, let's not ignore the bigger picture. They're actually improving the quality of life for hundreds of millions. If that's not a human rights victory, then I don't know what is. Number 3, China is expansionist. Next, we've got the ever-popular idea that China is out there trying to conquer the world, one country at a time. Every time you hear about China's Belt and Road Initiative, the Western narrative goes something like, China's just buying up countries to turn them into satellite states. Sounds like a James Bond movie, doesn't it? But let's slow down. China's BRI is about investing in infrastructure, roads, railways, energy grids, mostly in developing countries. It's not imperialism, it's investment. China's economy has been built on trade and infrastructure, and they're offering that same model to other countries, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia. Is there a risk of debt? Sure, but you know who else offers loans? The US and Europe. Have you seen the amount of US debt floating around? The irony is rich. The problem isn't China being expansionist, it's the fact that developing countries are looking for investment, and China is offering a way out of poverty. Meanwhile, the West is often absent when it comes to real, hands-on support. So, expansionist? Hardly. China's just being pragmatic. If China wanted to be expansionist, they'd have been a lot more aggressive in the South China Sea, where tensions with countries like the Philippines have been escalating. But instead of waging war, China has invested in resources, built infrastructure, and signed trade agreements. Weirdly enough, the US isn't exactly known for taking a non-aggressive approach in the same region. Oh, and let's talk about Taiwan, shall we? China's policy is one China, not let's take over Taiwan because we're evil. If Taiwan was truly in the geopolitical crosshairs, China wouldn't be sending $1 billion trade offer to the island, like they've done in the past. But no, the West loves to portray China as a crazy expansionist power that's on the brink of taking over the world. Yet, China is more focused on trade than war. Number 4. China can't innovate. The myth that China is just a cheap knockoff factory with no real technological prowess. Sure, for a long time, China was the place where things were made, but that was then and this is now. In the last 2 decades, China has completely flipped the script. Have you heard of Huawei? They're at the forefront of 5G tech, which is about to revolutionize the entire telecom industry. And don't even get me started on Alibaba, which is now a global e-commerce titan rivaling Amazon. China's tech industry has taken off with such speed that it's now setting the trends, not just following them. They're investing heavily in AI, renewable energy, quantum computing, and even space exploration. Oh, and let's not forget about electric cars. BYD, China's electric vehicle giant, just surpassed Tesla in sales. Let that sink in for a second. This country, often dismissed as a copycat, is now leading in some of the most cutting-edge industries. But here's the real kicker. China didn't just copy the West, they learned from it and then did it better. Take a look at how China's manufacturing sector has evolved. It's not just about low-cost labor anymore. Chinese factories are leading the world in automation, efficiency, and high-quality production. Even American companies like Apple and Tesla are starting to rely on Chinese suppliers because of the sheer quality of the products they make. So, can China innovate? You bet. But it's not just making copies of Western products anymore, it's creating them. They're no longer just a place where stuff is made, they're a place where stuff is imagined, engineered, and made better. And finally, number 5. China is dirty, backward, and polluting the world. Last but certainly not least, we've got the classic China is just a filthy industrial wasteland. To hear some people talk about it, you'd think China was built on a mountain of pollution, with smog so thick you could cut it with a knife. Is China facing environmental challenges? Absolutely. But here's the thing. China is the world's largest investor in renewable energy. They've also been planting forests at an unprecedented rate, over 6.6 billion trees in the last few decades to be exact. That's a whole lot of green. And sure, China's rapid industrialization has come with some environmental costs. But you know what else? Every other industrialized country, including the US, had its own share of dirty days. Remember the days of smog in LA or the industrial pollution in Europe? China's dealing with it too, but they're also taking action in ways that other countries haven't. They're investing in electric vehicles, wind power, and solar energy. In fact, China produces more solar panels than any other country, and they're dominating the renewable energy market. So, is China backward and polluting the world? Hardly. It's more accurate to say that China is in a race to clean up its act. The country's environmental policies are some of the most aggressive in the world, and China is on track to meet its goal of carbon neutrality by 2060. That's a long-term commitment that should be acknowledged, not ignored. Let's also not forget that China is the world's largest producer of electric vehicles. If the world is truly serious about reducing carbon emissions, China's push to electrify its transportation system is a pretty big deal. Even American companies like Tesla are heavily invested in China's EV market because they recognize that the country is a leader in the transition to cleaner, greener technology. So, while China's rapid urbanization and industrialization have left their marks on the environment, the country is working harder than most to reverse those effects. In fact, it's setting the stage for a cleaner, greener future, not just for itself, but for the whole world. In this context, calling China dirty is not only unfair, it's also outdated. So, there you have it, the 5 biggest Western misconceptions about China, all debunked. The narrative of China as a totalitarian, human rights violating, expansionist, backward, and polluted country is not only oversimplified, it's often just plain wrong. It's easy to buy into these myths when the media only shows the sensational headlines, but as we've seen, the reality is much more complex. China is a country that's rapidly transforming, and its people are far more empowered than most of the Western world gives them credit for. They may not follow the Western model of democracy, but that doesn't mean they don't have freedoms of their own. Freedoms that come with rising prosperity and opportunities that were once unimaginable. From being a global leader in tech to taking aggressive steps in fighting climate change, China is proving that it's not the backward, oppressed place many make it out to be. If you're still holding on to the old narratives, it might be time to let go and update your worldview. China is far from perfect, but it's certainly not the nightmare the West often portrays. In fact, it's leading the charge on many global issues, and while the West points fingers, China is getting things done. So next time someone tells you how terrible China is, maybe ask them if they've ever actually looked at the numbers, the facts, and the real progress the country has made in the last few decades. China may not be perfect, but it's certainly a lot more than just the propaganda you've been fed. So what do you think? Do you agree with our video? Tell us what you think by leaving your comments below. And if you like what you watched, make sure to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to show your support.